The city was sleeping. It was a December night in 1984. The air was still. The streets were quiet. Families lay in their small homes, resting after a long day of work. Bhopal, the capital of Madhya Pradesh, looked peaceful under the blanket of night. But beneath that silence, something was waiting. Something hidden. Something deadly. No one knew that in the heart of the city, inside a chemical plant, danger was already awake. It was waiting to break free. People dreamed. Children cuddled next to their mothers. Fathers thought of the next morning, of their jobs, of the small joys of life. None of them knew their lives were about to change forever. And when the clock moved closer to midnight, the story began. To understand what happened that night, we must first know the city. Bhopal was not a very big city then. It was known as the City of Lakes. Beautiful lakes shimmered under the sun during the day, giving the city its charm. People were friendly, simple, and hardworking. Families lived close to one another in crowded neighborhoods. Most people worked in small shops, textile mills, and government offices. Others worked in the big factory on the edge of town, the Union Carbide India Limited plant. For many, this factory was a symbol of hope. It promised jobs. It promised a better future. Fathers were proud when they got a job at the plant. They believed it meant stability. Mothers were glad because the salary brought food to the table. Children played around the factory walls, not knowing what was being made inside. Life was not easy in Bhopal. The city had poverty. Many families lived in small huts. Some worked all day just to earn enough for 2 meals. But there was also happiness in small things: morning tea, a child's laughter, a festival, or a prayer at the mosque or temple. Bhopal was alive with people's dreams. And none of those people imagined that a nightmare was waiting so close. The Union Carbide factory was built in the 1970s. It made pesticides, chemicals that farmers used to protect crops. India was an agricultural country, and such pesticides were in high demand. The government welcomed the factory. It was a sign of progress. The plant used dangerous chemicals, the most important one being methyl isocyanate, or mic. It was stored in large tanks deep inside the plant. Mic was highly toxic. Even a few drops could burn the skin or eyes. Breathing it in could kill. But the workers at the plant trusted the company. They believed safety was in place. They believed everything was under control. The truth was different. Reports had already shown that safety measures were weak. Machines were old. Maintenance was poor. Some safety systems were not working. Workers sometimes complained. They had seen leaks before. They had smelled the sharp odor of gas during their shifts. But their warnings were often ignored. Managers were under pressure to save money. Costs were cut. Safety was not the top priority. For the poor families living just outside the factory walls, the risks were even worse. Their houses were built so close, they could see the tall chimneys from their rooftops. They never knew the danger stored inside those tanks. The city saw the factory as a place of jobs. But hidden in its heart was a sleeping monster. In the months before December 1984, there were already signs. Leaks happened. Workers fell sick. Reports were filed. Some newspapers even wrote small articles about strange gas leaks inside the plant. But the news never spread far. People didn't understand the risks. Many trusted the company. Some feared losing their jobs if they questioned it. Inside the plant, workers whispered about danger. Why are the safety systems not working? Why is the refrigeration unit shut down? Why are the tanks still full? The truth was this: safety measures had been turned off to save money. The refrigeration system, which kept the deadly mic cool, was not working. The flare tower, which could burn escaping gas, was also not working. The gas scrubber, which could neutralize small leaks, was weak and failing. It was like living next to a loaded gun. And every day, that gun was getting closer to firing. But outside, life went on. Children played in the narrow lanes. Women cooked dinner. Men worked late shifts. No one knew that the danger was already building, drop by drop, inside the tanks. On the evening of December 2, 1984, workers reported a problem inside the Union Carbide plant. Water had somehow entered one of the huge storage tanks, Tank 610. That tank contained 40 tons of mic. Mic should never mix with water. The reaction is violent. It releases heat, gas, and pressure. And that is exactly what began to happen. The chemical inside Tank 610 started to boil. Pressure built up. The tank shook. Alarms went off. Workers ran around, trying to control it. But most of the safety systems were not working. The scrubber. Weak. The flare tower. Shut down. The refrigeration unit. Off. Inside the control room, panic grew. Dials showed rising pressure. Workers argued about what to do. Some managers dismissed the danger, saying it was only a small leak. Others feared the worst. Outside the plant walls, people were sleeping peacefully in their homes. A cool night breeze moved through the narrow streets of Bhopal. No one heard the alarms. No one knew that a killer cloud was about to escape. At around midnight, the tank could no longer hold the pressure. A valve gave way. Gas began to leak out. First slowly. Then with terrifying force. A white cloud rose into the air. It carried a sharp, burning smell. It spread quickly, moving low across the ground, following the wind. The people of Bhopal slept on, unaware. But soon, they would wake. And when they did, their world would never be the same. It was just past midnight. The deadly chemical cloud had escaped the factory walls. The gas was heavier than air. It didn't rise. It hugged the ground. It crept into the narrow lanes of Bhopal, moving silently but fast. At first, only a few dogs barked. Cows and buffaloes tied outside began to stir, restless. Some people woke with burning eyes. Some coughed. Then, suddenly, whole families felt their throats closing. Their eyes stung like fire. Their chests tightened. The smell was sharp, bitter, suffocating. Some thought it was chilly smoke. Others thought it was a fire somewhere. But it was not smoke. It was not fire. It was poison. Inside homes, people rushed to open windows. But the moment they did, the gas entered faster. The white cloud filled their rooms. Mothers grabbed their children. Fathers shouted for help. Confusion spread like the gas itself. The killer cloud was no longer inside the factory. It was inside the city. Street by street, lane by lane, the city woke up. Some ran out of their homes, coughing, clutching their throats. Others staggered and fell before they could reach the door. People shouted in panic. "Run! Run away! Something is burning our eyes. I can't breathe." But no one knew where to run. The gas was everywhere. It spread with the wind, covering neighborhood after neighborhood. Mothers carried babies and ran barefoot. Children cried for their parents. Elderly people gasped, unable to move. The roads filled with people running in every direction. Some fell, never to rise again. Some trampled over others in blind fear. Rickshaw pullers abandoned their carts. Bus drivers left their vehicles. The whole city was choking. Some thought they should run toward the railway station. Others rushed toward the lakes, believing water might save them. Some covered their faces with wet cloths, but the gas still burned through. In minutes, Bhopal was no longer a city of peace. It was a city of screams. The gas entered the lungs like a knife. People coughed until blood came out. Their eyes turned red, swollen, blind. Stomachs cramped. Bodies shook. Cattle collapsed on the roads. Birds fell from the sky. Dogs barked wildly, then lay still. Nature itself seemed to be dying. Hospitals soon filled. But the doctors didn't know what was happening. They had never seen such symptoms before. Patients kept coming, hundreds at once. Some arrived already dead. Some died on the hospital floors while waiting. Doctors tried giving eye drops. They tried giving oxygen. But nothing worked. They didn't know what gas it was. The company had not told them. Every second was a struggle. Outside, the chaos continued. Police cars drove through the streets with loudspeakers, but even they didn't know what to say. "Stay calm," they shouted. But how could people stay calm when they couldn't breathe? By now, thousands were running out of the city. Some boarded trains to escape. Others ran toward villages. But many collapsed on the way. The roads were lined with bodies. Bhopal was choking to death. The biggest hospital in the city, Hamidia Hospital, was overflowing. Doctors and nurses worked non-stop, but they had no guidance. No one from Union Carbide came forward with answers. Patients lay in hallways, on staircases, on the ground outside. Entire families came together, coughing, crying, dying. Doctors wrote prescriptions blindly, not knowing if the medicines would help. Some medical staff collapsed themselves. They too had inhaled the gas. One young doctor later said, "We were fighting an invisible enemy. No protective gear. No antidote. No plan. Just chaos." The survivors begged for water. But water did little. Mothers begged for their children to be saved. But many children died in their arms. In just a few hours, hospitals turned into morgues. By dawn on December 3rd, Bhopal was a city transformed. The gas cloud had thinned, but its damage was everywhere. Streets were littered with bodies. Families searched desperately for loved ones. Some found them alive but blind. Some found them silent forever. Bullock carts carried the dead to makeshift burial grounds. Trucks carried piles of bodies to cremation sites. Funeral pyres burned without pause. The smell of chemicals still hung in the air. But now it was mixed with the smell of death. People asked, "What was this gas? Why were we not warned? Who will help us now?" But answers did not come. The city of lakes had become a city of tears. The tragedy was no longer hidden. It was written on the faces of tens of thousands. And yet, this was only the beginning. The sun rose on December 3, 1984, but Bhopal was not the same city anymore. The morning was quiet, but it was not peace. It was the silence of shock. The silence of death. Where once children played in the streets, now bodies lay. Men, women, and animals, still, lifeless, side by side. Some lay on doorsteps. Some on the roads. Some inside their homes, never waking from sleep. Those who survived stepped outside, coughing, their eyes red, their throats raw. They looked around in disbelief. The city they had known yesterday was gone. Neighbors who had shared meals were now gone forever. Families who had laughed together the evening before were now broken. The lakes reflected the morning sun, but the city around them was drowning in grief. Every lane carried stories of heartbreak. A father searched through the hospital corridors, calling the names of his children. He found one alive, coughing and blind. The other two, gone. A mother sat on the roadside, rocking her baby in her arms. The baby was silent. She whispered lullabies, hoping for a breath. But the breath never came. Old grandparents, too weak to run the night before, were found lying still inside their huts. Whole families were lost. Some homes had no one left alive. In the rush of the night, families were torn apart. Some children had run one way, parents another. Many never found each other again. Survivors wandered, searching, calling names that were never answered. It was a morning of questions with no answers. A morning of grief that had no end. And yet, in this sea of sorrow, there were voices of survival. One boy, barely 12, had covered his face with a wet towel and guided his younger sister through the streets all night. Both were alive, though weak. A rickshaw puller had carried 3 unconscious strangers to the hospital, running barefoot. He did not know their names. He only knew they needed help. Some families escaped because the wind had blown the gas in another direction, sparing their lanes. For them, survival came with guilt. Why were they spared when others were not? There were also small acts of courage. Doctors who stayed in hospitals despite choking themselves. Volunteers who lit funeral pyres when families could not. Neighbors who gave shelter to those who had lost everything. These survival stories gave hope. But they were like small candles in a night of endless darkness. By the second day, people demanded answers. They asked, who was responsible? Why was the city not warned? Why were safety systems not working? Union Carbide, the company that owned the factory, stayed silent at first. Officials gave vague statements. No one explained the gas, the risks, or the cure. Doctors begged for information, but no help came. Anger grew. Survivors gathered in the streets, shouting for justice. But many were too weak to even protest. Their lungs burned, their eyes still blind, their bodies still shaking. The government began investigations. The world's eyes turned to Bhopal. News reporters arrived, shocked by what they saw. They showed the world the pictures, bodies in rows, mass funerals, crying children. The struggle for justice had begun. But it would not be easy. When the world learned of Bhopal, the reaction was one of horror. How could this happen, people asked. Why were so many innocent lives lost? Who will be punished? Foreign newspapers called it the world's worst industrial disaster. Governments across the globe demanded answers. Environmental groups raised alarms about chemical safety. But in Bhopal, the people were still waiting. Waiting for medicine. Waiting for food. Waiting for help. The survivors were not just victims of gas. They were victims of neglect. Neglect from the company. Neglect from authorities. Neglect from those who should have protected them. The world watched. But the people of Bhopal lived the pain every day. And this pain was not just for days or months. It would last for years. For lifetimes. After the gas leak, survivors hoped justice would come quickly. They believed the company would be punished, and they would be given fair help. But justice was slow. Union Carbide's top officials left India. Survivors demanded their return, but the company denied full responsibility. Long court cases began, dragging on for years. Lawyers argued, governments negotiated, but the people of Bhopal waited. In 1989, a settlement was reached. Union Carbide agreed to pay $470 million in compensation. But this money was far less than what survivors needed. Many families got only a small sum, sometimes less than the cost of a hospital visit. People felt betrayed. They had lost loved ones, health, homes, and futures. And yet the fight in the courts gave them almost nothing. Justice delayed. Justice denied. The tragedy did not end in 1984. The gas had entered lungs, blood, and bones. Survivors continued to suffer for years. Children born after the tragedy carried the effects in their bodies. Many were born with deformities. Many grew up with weak lungs, weak hearts, weak eyes. Mothers who inhaled the gas carried scars in their wombs. Fathers who survived struggled to work, their health broken forever. Families sank deeper into poverty. Even the land and water around the factory were poisoned. Chemicals leaked into the soil and groundwater. Survivors drank polluted water for years, adding new wounds to old ones. Bhopal was not just a tragedy of one night. It was a tragedy that stretched across decades. The Bhopal disaster shocked the world into action. Governments across the globe began asking tough questions about chemical plants. In India, new safety laws were introduced. The Environment Protection Act of 1986 was passed. Rules about hazardous industries became stricter. Companies were forced to follow stronger safety standards. Internationally, Bhopal became a case study. Universities, scientists, and lawmakers studied what went wrong. They learned that safety cannot be ignored. That cost-cutting can cost lives. That corporations must be held accountable. And yet, even with these changes, survivors of Bhopal still asked, why did these lessons come only after so many lives were lost? Decades later, the voices of Bhopal still echo. Survivor groups continue to fight. They demand clean water. They demand proper healthcare. They demand justice from those who escaped responsibility. Children born years after 1984 still carry the burden of that night. Many cannot walk properly. Many cannot see clearly. Their lives are proof that the tragedy never truly ended. Artists, writers, and filmmakers tell their stories. Activists remind the world not to forget. Every year, on December 3rd, candles are lit in Bhopal. Names are read. Tears are shed. The city remembers. The voices of Bhopal are voices of pain. But they are also voices of strength. Survivors have not given up. They fight, even when the world looks away. The Bhopal gas tragedy is not just history. It is a warning. It teaches us that human lives must never be sacrificed for profit. That safety must never be neglected. That corporations must answer for their actions. For the people of Bhopal, the tragedy was not a story. It was life. It was loss. It was survival. For the world, it must be a lesson. We must remember the silence of that dawn, the cries in those streets, the children who never woke again. We must remember that progress without responsibility can destroy. The Bhopal gas tragedy is one of the darkest chapters in human history. But from its darkness, we must find light, the light of awareness, the light of justice, the light of care for every life. Because the greatest tribute to the victims is not just to remember them, but to make sure it never happens again. Guys, if you liked the story, then click the subscribe button and also like and share the video. Thanks.